This is draft season. John Schmeelk, Tony Pauline from Sportskeeda with you. Draft season is presented by Moody's. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at Moody's.com. Tony, another fun weekend of college football, including a more of a classic Big Ten game. It's not Rutgers USC or some other newfangled Big Ten matchup. Ohio State and Penn State, we're going to talk about that game. A lot of others. We're also going to do Tony's risers and sliders on the offensive side of the ball on today's show. Tony, let's start with Ohio State, Penn State, and this looked like an old school Ohio State, Penn State game. Not a ton of scoring, and the high-flying Penn State offense that we've seen for a lot of this year was not to be.
No, I mean, two maligned coaches, and really right off the bat, if you watch that game, Penn State marches down the field. They get a field goal. They get a pick six against Will Howard. And then, the tables turned. And Ohio State stopped Penn State, on 2 4th and goals? Penn State couldn't kick it, push it into the end zone. I think a lot of what we've seen from these teams throughout the year, inconsistent play from many of their top prospects. And I think let's start off with Drew Allar, who, as a true freshman at Penn State, everybody was fawning over, justifiably so, because he looked so fantastic. Everybody, including myself, had him graded as a potential early pick at the quarterback position. Yet, I mean, he's very streaky. He struggles getting into a groove in games. He makes some outstanding receptions, and then he just shows poor vision. And I think if you watch that game, you have to say that Will Howard, who at best is a day 3 pick, was the better quarterback over Drew Allar.
Yeah, largest 12 of 20, Tony, 146 yards, no touchdowns and a pick. Will Howard, 16 of 24, 182, a pair of touchdowns and an interception. And, Penn State, they just couldn't get their passing game going. And we'll talk about their tight end a little bit later on in the show. And, Allar's trying to get himself into a day 2 conversation here, I think, with the NFL draft this year. And this certainly did not help his cause.
Well, I think he's going to go day. I think he's going to go day 2. I think the thing is, coming into the season, people thought maybe top 20, potentially top 15 if he played, to the level that everyone expected. But like many of the quarterbacks that we have talked about in the past, and we'll talk about in the show, they really haven't lived. Allar has not lived up to expectations.
All right, a couple other players in this game we want to talk about. Tony Abdul-Carter had a pair of sacks. He's your guy, and he continues to show out this year.
He's just so explosive. He's athletic. He's strong. Now, they took Donovan Jackson. Ohio State is down to their 3rd offensive tackle with Josh Simon, being lost to injury in that Oregon game. So they took Donovan Jackson, the natural guard, and kicked him out to left tackle. He looked okay early. Then all of a sudden, Abdul-Carter just found the way to exploit him, and he just kept exploiting him. Had 2 sacks. He is. I mean, he's not the biggest guy in the world, but you can see he's got that natural body strength, and he's very explosive. And as I've said time and time again, people are going to broad brush him or pinhole him as an edge rusher. He's primarily coming out of 3-point stance these days. But, man, he can do so much more. He is good standing over tackle. He is good in space. And he did his best to impact that game on Saturday.
So let's take on the defensive side of the ball, the 2 Ohio State pass rushers, JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer. Yeah. Your thoughts?
Again, like Allar, like a lot of the high talent, Denzel Burke on Ohio State, really haven't lived up to expectations. Tuimoloau had a half a sack in the game, 1 tackle for loss. For the season, he's got 4.5 sacks. Now, this is a guy who was a fringe first-round pick in last year's draft, probably would have been top 40 choice, signed the big NIL deal to go back to Ohio State, and he's been non-existent in games. He really is not a better player this year than he was a year ago. Jack Sawyer had 4 tackles in the game against Penn State, has 2.5 sacks this year. Jack Sawyer is sort of that jack back. He plays that, that pass rushing role. And again, non-existent for much of the season, plays in spurts. A guy who I think has hurt his draft stock in 2024 rather than helping it.
Yeah, I want to touch on some of the offensive skill players in this game, Tony. The running backs, first and foremost, Quinshon Judkins continues to impress in this game. 14 carries, 95 yards. Javion Henderson was 10 for 54. This is why this Ohio State running back combination has worked well. But I think Quinshon Judkins is trying to make a pretty strong argument for being maybe running back number 2 after Ashton Giante. We'll have to see how that goes.
What impressed me about Judkins was his all-around game. I mean, he was picking up the difficult yardage on third down. There was a block late in the first quarter, late in the first half, where he got out front, knocked the defender out of the play, sprung Will Howard free for a long run, and picked up the first down. Picked up the first down on third down. So it's not just you give him the football, he puts his head down, and he runs straight forward. No, he's showing good vision. He's very explosive. He's got sneaky speed. What I mean by that is, he looks like a plotter, but all of a sudden he turns it on. He's able to beat defenders into the open field. And the blocking on Saturday really impressed me. Not only the results, but the effort he gave blocking.
And then Travion Henderson, again, 10 for 54. And then for Penn State, Nick Singleton, just 6 carries for 15 yards in this game, Tony. He did have 6 catches for 54 yards, but you would have liked to see more from him on the ground.
Absolutely, because, like Drew Law, off the 2023 film, you expected so much more. Now, credit to that Ohio State defensive line. I talked about Tuimeola and Sawyer being, disappointing most of the season. They did shut down that running game. Tyleek Williams in the middle of that line, who's had a very good season. He's an athletic guy who I think is going to go somewhere in the early to mid-second round. So you got to give it to the Ohio State defensive front seven. Another guy I got to mention, Cody Simon. He kind of gets lost in the conversation because Ohio State has so much top-end defensive talent. But Cody Simon, the middle linebacker, I think he led the game with like 11 tackles. He's a smart guy, very instinctive, does a great job leading the defense. And from an NFL prospect point of view, if he puts in some good workouts prior to the draft, I think Cody Simon's one of those guys that ends up in the late rounds, turns out to be a 7th linebacker special teams player on Sunday.
Now, this guy wasn't on your list here, Tony, but I'm going to ask you about him. Because we haven't talked a ton about Emeka Egbuka so far this year. We talked about him last year. If he decided to come out, late first round, second round type of guy. 3 catches, 31 yards this game, and a touchdown. Jeremiah Smith gets a lot of the pub, given how the true freshman has been playing. How has Egbuka either helped or hurt his draft stock this year?
He definitely hasn't helped it. You could say it's either remained level or he's hurt it because Smith is getting all the carries. Now, I also think that's a function of the fact that if you watch Will Howard, he's a guy who goes to his first read most of the time. So he rarely moves his head away from that first target, which I think hurts Egbuka. He's a very reliable receiver. I think he is I thought maybe second round. I think he's more of a third round guy if he tests well. I mean, he hasn't really presented himself as anything more than a potential third receiver on Sunday, if he even is that, because Smith is not only getting the pub, he's making the plays. He's a dynamic receiver. I mean, he looks like a big time talent moving forward. I have to wonder what happens with Ohio State this season if they're able to keep those guys if they don't go far into the playoffs. But I think, to your point, I don't think he's not helped himself. I think he's either remained level or maybe has taken a step back in Buka, the wide receiver.
So still looking at a day 2 pick probably for him. You mentioned Jeremiah Smith. He's not draft eligible. And NFL fans, don't get excited. That's the 2027 NFL draft. So everyone take a deep breath and relax. One other draft ineligible player, Tony, you want to talk about was Caleb Downs from this game.
Wow. I mean, wow. You want to talk about a complete safety, a guy that you can line up over the slot receiver, and he shows outstanding ball skills, a guy who brings it against the run, physical player, the transfer from Alabama. I mean, he is everything he is cracked up to be. That inconsistency and the lower than expectations that I talked about from Tuimeola, from Sawyer, you've not seen that from Caleb Downs, because this guy is all over the field making positive plays against the run and the pass.
All right, let's jump to another game here, Tony. Ole Miss and Arkansas. Arkansas has been pretty competitive this year, but they were not competitive against this Ole Miss offense. My goodness. Jackson Dart in this game, 25 of 31, 515 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns. Now on the year, he's completing 80% of his passes, 21 touchdowns, 3 picks, over 3,000 passing yards. Just an unbelievable performance out of Jackson Dart and that Ole Miss offense as they try to secure their spot in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Actually closer to 81% completion passes. And, this is a game that early on you thought Arkansas was going to stay in it. Then, boom. I mean, Mississippi just ran away with it. And, Jackson Dart, I like him. I like his accuracy, his pass placement, the way he manages the game, the way he controls the team and is in command of the situation. It's the downfield arm with Jackson Dart that kind of scares me. He's a Chad Pennington type, if you remember Chad
Yeah.
Pennington. Gets it between the ears, knows what's happening on the field, uses all of his receivers. But if you're looking for a quarterback in a vertical offense, you're not going to look towards Jackson Dart.
Yeah, he looks like one of those kind of long time NFL backups for maybe he'll start for a couple years for a team, something like that. But you're right. Just like the physical skill set isn't dominating. One guy we haven't talked about, Tony, and I saw you in a monster game in this game, is Jordan Watkins, the wide receiver for Ole Miss. We've talked about Trey Harris. I don't believe he played in this game. I think he was hurt, right? So Jordan Watkins went bananas. 8 catches, 254 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And I realized we had not talked about him. I'm curious what people have told you about Jordan Watkins.
And credit to Jackson Dart. I mean, the fact is, his number one guy isn't there, so he goes to literally his number 3 guy. Now, as far as Watkins is concerned, you got to wait and see what his 40 times are like, what his testing numbers are like. He came into the season graded as at best, I'm looking at it right now. I gave him a 6th-round grade coming into the season, 5'10 and a half, 197, maybe slightly under a 4 or 5. I gave him a 6th-round grade. From what I'm looking at here, most of the scouts gave him a PFA grade. So, good for Watkins, good for Jackson Dart. And I think really, you talked about Mbuka. The guy who's kind of left out of this conversation is Antoine Wells of Mississippi. Transfer from South Carolina, entered the 2023 season with some day 2 grades from scouts. I believe he had an ankle injury 3 games into the 2023 season, was shelved for the rest of the year. Transfers to Mississippi, can't find his footing. You got Trey Harris there. You got Watkins there. You got the kid from that started at UTSA there. I'll find his name in a second here as I'm fumbling over myself. Zachary Franklin, who's had a decent year. But Watkins is a decent receiver. I have a 6th-round grade on him. Coming into the season, scouts had graded him as an undrafted free agent.
I need to check the pronunciation on this, and I don't have it.
Yeah,
so
good luck.
Princely Umanmielen, I believe, something close to that. Your thoughts, Tony? I will happily take the bullet there now, and now you can just say him or he. Good luck.
We'll call him Prince.
Okay.
The pass rusher formerly known as Prince.
Yeah.
Florida transfer, in great measurables: 6'4", 255 pounds, runs consistently and plays in the 4.6s. He's a guy who can make an impact when he wants to. Had 2 sacks. 2 tackles for loss against Arkansas, 7.5 sacks this season. The problem with him is motor and consistency. When he turns it on, he's a tough guy to stop. He's everything you want in that edge rusher. You can stand over tackle. You can occasionally have him come out of a 3-point stance. He has the athleticism that he's shown to get out in space and make plays in pursuit. The problem is the effort isn't only there. It isn't always there. And he has day 2 playing potential. He shows day 2 flashes, but the consistency is more later rounds. And I'm sure when he goes to the combine, because he will get a combine invite, he's going to be grilled about that during those interviews. And that will be the determining factor as to where he ends up in the draft.
Draft season is brought to you by Moody's, a proud partner of the New York Giants, uniting the brightest minds to turn today's risk into tomorrow's opportunities. Learn more at Moody's.com. All right, let's go over to Oregon and Michigan, Tony. Evan Stewart and Trayshawn Holden had a chance to go against Michigan without Will Johnson. Evan Stewart, though, just 3 catches, 16 yards in the game.
Here's the problem with Evan Stewart. At times, he looks like a first-round prospect, and at times you think, he's going to be in that conversation for that second tier, after Ted McMillan of Arizona. But then the consistency isn't there. He disappears for long stretches. And I was really hoping to see that matchup between Will Johnson and Evan Stewart. Will Johnson didn't play because of injury. Evan Stewart just didn't have a lot of passes thrown his way. That inconsistency is a concern. When you look at Stewart, he's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the ability to be a big-time receiver. He's just got to step it up, and he's got to step up his play. I think at this point in time, he transferred from Texas A&M. It's not. He's got to get into a groove with the quarterback, who we'll talk about in a second. He's really got to step up his play if he wants to enter the draft, which I'm sure he's going to, and be an early pick.
Your guy, running back Jordan James, a productive day, 23 carries, 117 yards, and a touchdown. But you were impressed by Dylan Gabriel, who I know he's not a big pro prospect, Tony, but there was a lot of excitement him going to Oregon, and he's played up to expectations. He's had a very nice season.
Completed 75% of his passes this year, 19 TDs, only 5 interceptions, 22 of 35 for 294 yards. I consider him a poor man's Baker Mayfield. He's that type of quarterback. Ironically, led Oklahoma last year and did a good job of it. Goes into the Oregon system, fits it, he's like a duck in water there. They're the number one team in the nation. He gets overlooked all the time.
Well done there, Tony. Duck in water. Good job.
Duck in water. Whatever it was.
Oregon, duck in water. That's perfect.
There you go. All right. And that was not planned. Believe me.
That was well done.
Especially coming from my head. Just the way he runs the offense. We talked about Jackson Dart before. It's a similar situation with Dylan Gabriel. Knows where his receivers are. Uses all his receivers. Gets the most from his team. A great leader. This is a guy who was graded as a street free agent coming into the season. He's got a bit of Brock Purdy in his game in the sense that, it's the mental intangibles that enables him to lead the team down the field consistently and answer when the team is behind. So I absolutely think that Dylan Gabriel will go from street free agent to potential late round pick. You're talking probably at the Shrine game, we'll see him there. Assuming that, how close the Shrine game is to the national championship game if Oregon gets that far. But a guy who I think is just really sadly overlooked because he doesn't have the great size, because he doesn't have the great arm. But all he's done, going back to his days of Central Florida, is just lead his team down the field and get his offense into the end zone.
Yeah, and then again, Oregon, I think we all assume they're going to play at least 2 or 3 playoff games here, Tony, so he'll have a chance to wow against some good competition and give scouts something to look at. All right, Texas Tech and Iowa State. I don't think we featured either one of these teams at all yet, Tony, this year. So tell me some of the guys you were looking at from that Texas Tech Iowa State game.
2 receivers, and a guy who last week, if you go back to our show with Kyle Krabs, you asked me about off-the-radar receivers, and I mentioned this guy, Josh Kelly of Texas Tech, Washington State transfer, 8 receptions, 127 yards for 2 TDs against Iowa State, who had the number 2 pass defense in the nation going into that game. For the year, he's got 68 receptions, 736 yards, 5 TDs. He's more of your Jordan Addison type, if you will. 6'1", 195 pounds. He's going to run in the low 4.5s. Just a great route runner, a great natural pass catcher, knows how to get open, just does a great job, almost clairvoyant working with the quarterback, knows what the quarterback's going to do, so he gets back into the open spot of the defense to make himself an available target. Again, a guy who I think he could sneak into day 2. A lot of scouts like him as a day 3 pick, but a very productive guy who's not going to wow you physically. He's not going to have great testing numbers, but just an outstanding natural receiver who I believe can be a number 3 at the next level.
How about Jaden Higgins?
Yeah, he's a bigger guy, 6'3.5", 212 pounds. Had 10 receptions for 140 yards and 1 TD against Texas Tech. 55 receptions for 703 yards. He's your bigger possession receiver, although he's sneaky fast. I mean, he's the guy who's probably going to time in the low 4.5s, plays to that speed, doesn't have that burst. But if you're looking for that big body pass catcher who can win out for the contested throw, who can go over the middle of the crowd, that's a guy who can do it for you. And Higgins is probably going to be drafted a little bit after Kelly. So if Kelly's a late 3rd round pick, I would project Higgins as an early 4th round pick. If Kelly slides into the 4th round, I think Higgins is more of a late 4th, early 5th round type guy.
And then what do you like about Malik Verdon?
Wow. I mean, we talked about the kid from Emanwari, the kid from South Carolina, the linebacker size safety. This is Malik Verdon. 4 tackles, 3 pass breakups against Iowa State. He was a guy, when I watched him over the summer, really stood out on film because of his imposing figure. 6'3", 215, and he plays to that size. He's not afraid to mix it up, but he's got solid ball skills. He's not just an opportunistic guy. He tracks the pass in the air. He has a nice move to the throw. I don't believe he's a natural free safety, but I think if you play a zone type system and you want to leave him at safety, I think he fits in there. If he gets bigger, maybe he's a one gap type linebacker.
Interesting. All right, Tennessee and Kentucky, Tony. You liked a bunch of the guys up front in this game.
Well, we always talk about the Kentucky defensive tackles, primarily Deontay Walker, but I mean, the Texas Volunteers have three defensive tackles that are NFL prospects, primarily starting with Omar Thomas. Had 3 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 1 sack. He's 6'3.5", 310 pounds, and he's a playmaker at that size. He's not just a gap occupier. He's quick. He's very explosive. Great first step off the snap. Penetrates the line of scrimmage. Always chasing the action hard. And while Deontay Walker of Kentucky is probably a first-round pick, you're looking at Omar Thomas being a day 3 pick, but Omar Thomas has all the skills and the intensity to play on Sunday.
Awesome. All right, Tony, let's get to our risers and sliders here. And these are guys we've talked about over the course of the year, but it's good to kind of focus in on them. At quarterback, the first guy on your list is Cam Ward, coming off a game where he completed 25 of 41 passes for 400 yards, a 5-touchdown game at quarterback. And if I had to, guess right now who the top quarterback would be in this year's draft, just because of a lot of the other stuff with Shedeur Sanders that's going on that might scare some teams a little bit. And frankly, Cam Ward's a little bit, I think more of a physical prospect than Sanders is. I think it's probably Cam Ward. He's had a heck of a year, 29 touchdowns, 6 picks on the season.
Yeah, and he's probably more mature because he's played more football in the college level. Washington State transfer. Remember the story last year? Was going to transfer out of Washington State, entered the transfer portal, then said he was going to enter the draft. He was actually on the Shrine Bowl roster. We talked to Eric Galko about that. Decided to hop back in the transfer portal, got the deal he wanted for Miami, and it's worked out for everybody. Why is he a riser? Well, he's a riser because coming into the season, scouts and everybody else looked at him as a day 3, 5th round pick. And now he's jumping towards the early part of round 1. Last time that happened was Jaden Daniels a year ago. So, I mean, there are still some fundamentals. The way he throws the ball, he's got to work out. But the guy's on a straight shot north as far as his draft stock is concerned, as well as the Miami Hurricanes. I mean, they're undefeated. You talked about that game Saturday. They were down in the game, as they were against Louisville, a couple of the games. And again, Cam Ward just finds a way to answer.
Garrett Nussmeier, another guy we've talked about here, Tony. He was on a bye this week. Coming off not a great game against Texas A&M, though. 25 of 50, 405 yards, 3 picks in that game, a pair of touchdowns. He's the guy that I think could do for another year of seasoning at LSU. We'll see if he decides to go back. But otherwise, I think he's a guy that some teams will like.
I think he's got to go back. I think it's a mistake if he enters the draft. He's got a very high touchdown to interception ratio, throws too many picks. There's a lot to like about Nussmeier, who was basically off the radar coming into the season because it was old Jaden Daniels last year. I think we're seeing the development of a potentially very good quarterback, but I agree with you. Should go back for another year.
And then Curtis Rourke, the Indiana Hoosiers, who continue to just dominate in the Big Ten, Tony. They're trying to get into the playoffs here. A transfer out of Ohio. I believe this is his 6th year, when I was looking earlier today. 6'4", 227. He's got all the size he wants, 73% completion rate. He's been great this year.
Phenomenal. I mean, probably plays for the best coach in college football, and Kurt Cignetti, who's turned that program around on a dime. Has also turned Rourke's career around on a dime, completing 73% of his passes, 2,200 yards passing, 19 touchdowns, only 3 TDs. Missed 1 game because he had surgery on his thumb, came back. They've got a big game in 2 weeks against Ohio State. That will be very telling. But as far as Rourke is concerned, you're talking about a guy that was a fringe 7th-round pick who I believe has solidly put himself into day 3 because of the decision-making, because of the way he's consistently played at a high level. He's got nice size. He's got a decent arm. They really don't throw the ball downfield that much, so you can really, because they don't have the receivers primarily, so you can really get a grip on what his deep arm is like, or his arm strength, or his accuracy. A lot to like there. And Rourke, he's basically a lesser version of Cam Ward. I mean, he's exceeded expectations wildly, and his team has exceeded expectations wildly, and it's in large part due to his play at quarterback.
And then we have our 3 sliders at quarterback here, Tony, of Carson Beck. He has two
Yeah.
more interceptions in 4 of his last 5 games, which is a
Yeah.
crazy number. Quinn Ewers, who obviously missed some games due to injury, he doesn't have one 300-yard passing game this year, which I think is fairly telling. And then Riley Leonard, who transferred to Notre Dame from Duke, just hasn't been able to get anything on with the passing game.
I think Carson Beck, if I'm correct, had threw 3 interceptions against Georgia. I'm sorry, he plays for Georgia. Threw 3 interceptions against Alabama, 3 interceptions against Texas, 3 interceptions against Florida. And these are not like opportunistic interceptions where they're tip balls. These are situations where Carson Beck is throwing into double and even triple coverage, where he's misreading the defense. Now, the headlines say his great plays in the second half brought the team back. Yeah, but his bad interceptions in the first half is what is digging the hole for Georgia, and they need to come back. And again, I mean, Carson Beck is a guy that, you're in New York. We hear it all the time. Top 10 pick, New York Giants. No way. I mean, when you're a quarterback and you are throwing this many interceptions, you are just going to drop down draft boards. And I think it's going to be very tough, the way Carson Beck has played, to make a case for him as a top 15 pick come the 2025 NFL draft.
And save for Quinn
As
Ewers.
As far as Ewers is concerned, it's the same old with Ewers. And I was a fan of his, but he's very slow to move his head off the primary target. He's very late pulling the trigger. I mean, he takes too much time to make his decisions. You can do that on Saturday. You do that on Sunday, you're going to get slaughtered.
And how about then Riley Leonard, Tony, a guy that, again, just has not been able to get that pass game going at Notre Dame?
Better runner than passer, better athlete than quarterback. I mean, just has not developed his game. Showed flashes early on, but his game has remained stagnant. And, again, I never thought of Riley Leonard other than anything other than a day 3 pick. And there were some people who thought he could be a first-round choice. No way.
Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants, uniting the brightest minds to turn today's risk into tomorrow's opportunities. Learn more at Moody's.com. All right, Tony, let's go to the running back position. And I'm not sure there's another player in this draft class that has rocket shipped himself into, he's not going to be the top pick in the draft, but you could argue he's the most talented and explosive player in this draft class. That's Ashton Gente from Boise State. I mean, these are like best kid in high school stats, right? 1,500 rushing yards already, 20 touchdowns on the ground, 8 yards per carry, throw another receiving touchdown to boot. I mean, this guy looks like Barry Sanders. He looks like a kid that's playing against kids like 3 years younger than him. It's unbelievable.
And it is his versatile ball carry. He's not just a between the tackles runner. He can turn the corner. He can get outside. He can beat the defenders around the perimeter. He's prone to those big yard plays where if there's any slight open space, he will take it 35 yards. Obviously, he's got to be the favorite for the Heisman right now. The San Diego State game Friday night was very interesting because I was watching it. I think at halftime he had like 12 carries for 39 yards. And at the time, Boise State was winning by almost 4 touchdowns. I'm like, well, what are they going to do with him in the second half? You put him on the field, you give him the ball, you risk injury. Oh, they gave him the ball. I think he ended up with 140 yards in that game. Just continually answers the call, will be the first running back selected off the board next April. I got to assume somewhere between pick 12 to 18, depending on what the order is.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a big conversation as to whether or not he can figure out a way to slide into the back end of that top 10. We'll see how this goes for the remainder of the year. A player that we talked about before last season started, Tony, as a potential top running back in last year's draft class was Raheem Sanders. He was then at Arkansas. In 2022, he had a 1,400-yard season. Big guy, athletic. And last year, frankly, a disastrous year for him. It just did not go well. You've pointed out on the show, weight issues, things like that. But he has come out and had a heck of a year. In his last game against Texas A&M, 144 rushing yards on the ground. And he's a guy that wants to get back into this running back mix in what's a pretty loaded class.
507 yards and, more importantly, 8 TDs. And, I've talked about this before. You look at the success that Braylon Allen, the 4th-round pick of the New York Jets, is having for that team, not just as a road grader, but as a guy with excellent vision, terrific short area quickness, the ability to not just run over defenders, but dart around them and create yards. That's what you're seeing with Raheem Sanders. Obviously, the change of scenery has worked well for him. He's having a terrific year. He's an exciting player to watch. On an offense that can be up and down at South Carolina, Sanders has done a good job answering the call when they need it, and he's helped his draft stock.
And Dylan Sampson's done a good job at Tennessee. This past week, 27 carries, 142 yards, 2 more touchdowns. He's been very productive.
Very explosive running back who was a rotational guy last year. They handed him the ball. He's helping the team. He's helping his draft stock. Explosive. If there's a little bit of space, he is gone. I think a guy who not too many people knew about going into the season. Right now, you're looking at a top 125 pick.
Do you think Caleb Johnson can become a top 125 pick? He's been so productive, Tony. 1,200 rushing yards, 19 touchdowns, 7.5 yards per carry. He's been dominant for Iowa.
And the thing I like about Johnson is, you look at Iowa backs in the past, and they were primarily downhill ball carriers. Johnson shows great vision. He shows great run instincts, the ability to create yardage, make defenders miss, basically leave him grasping for air, and then he's off to the races if there's any open room at all. I think there's the versatility, still better running on the inside, but he's got a lot of ability to pick and choose his spots on the inside and create yardage, which is why I like him more. I'm usually down on Iowa running backs. Johnson has really impressed me.
And he only had 460 yards last year, so he's taken a big step as he's got more responsibility. And then one running back that hasn't necessarily made the most of his opportunities this year is Florida's, and not surprised, Florida's had a rough year, right? Montrell Johnson.
And you would think with the ups and downs at the quarterback position, they would be able to lean on him. 373 yards this year on 70 carries. Coming into the season, he was great as a potential third-round pick. You got to think of him right now as a midday 3 pick, probably in the 5th round.
All right, wide receivers and tight ends, some of the risers, Tony. Let's start with Evan Stewart. We talked about him briefly before. He's had some big-time flashes, but extremely inconsistent game to game.
But it's an inconsistent receiver position, so there's a lot of room for if he takes off the rest of the season, and there will be those opportunities playing for Oregon because they're going to be playing deep into the year, into the playoffs. Evan Stewart can, watch his draft stock rise. And you know what's going to happen, and we've seen it time and a half in the past, is Evan Stewart will have 1 or 2 spectacular games in the playoffs, and everyone will, start to overdraft him or get a little bit too crazy about him. But he'll find a level, and his level, is definitely late first round potential. If he starts to pick up the play, he's got that sort of skill.
And I think it's telling, Tony, as for the wide receiver class, we've had so many really good classes the last few years. Only 1 wide receiver on your list here, but you do have 2 tight ends. Tyler Warren out of Penn State, 51 catches, over 600 yards, 4 touchdowns. But I think almost 370 yards came in just 2 games. He had that 224-yard game versus USC, 146-yard versus Bowling Green, 6'6", 257, big kid.
Yeah, and I mean, a guy who does everything. He blocks. he basically catches the ball out of the backfield. They had that play. They showed that play against USC where he actually was the center. He snapped the ball. Then he went out on the pass route, and he caught the touchdown. I mean, he does a little bit of everything. I still think he's going to be the second tight end taken in the draft after the Michigan kid, Loveland. Not going to run all that fast. But he's a 3-down tight end. I don't want to say he's a throwback type. He's a little bit more than that. He's just not the great seam stretcher. But when you have a guy you could put on the field as a 3rd-down receiver in short yardage, as a 3rd-down blocker, you can send him over the middle 10 to 12 yards, and he does so many things for you. Definitely going to help. It definitely helped his draft stock.
All right, and then how about tight end Eli Stowers? Yeah. Vanderbilt's had a really good year, Tony. We haven't talked about many of their players. 38 catches, 516 yards, and 4 touchdowns.
New Mexico State transfer, followed his coach Jerry Kill from New Mexico State to Vanderbilt. 38 receptions, 516 yards, 4 TDs. He's decent length, 6'3.5". He probably goes about 230 pounds. He's more of your move tight end prospect. He is what Tyler Warren isn't. He's a guy that can get down the field. He's a guy that stretches the seam. He's a guy that's going to create mismatches in the secondary. He is a real good athlete that is becoming a much better pass catcher. And he is someone who, when I watched the film last year from New Mexico State, I thought, okay, 5th, 6th round. But right now, I mean, he's moving 4th round. If he tests well, potentially 3rd rounder for Eli Stowers if he enters the draft.
And 2 sliders at the pass catching positions, Rara Thomas from Georgia, Tony, and Antoine Wells out of Miss.
Yeah, Rara Thomas, if you watch the 2023 film, looked like he had big time potential. Got suspended in the preseason. because of an arrest. I think it was domestic assault. If I am wrong, I apologize. Somebody could correct me. But he's not playing football. That's the thing with Robert Thomas. We don't know if he's going to be playing football. And he was a guy who had day two potential. Antoine Wells, I talked about him earlier. The South Carolina transfer is playing at Mississippi right now. Came into the 2023 season with day two grades, has, I believe, 22 or 23 catches, has never rebounded from the injury 3 games in the 2023 season that put him on the sidelines. He is definitely slid. Now, he could end up as a late round gem if he ever gets back to the playing form that he showed in 2022. But there's no doubt that, Antoine Wells' draft stock right now is significantly lower than it was just 4 months ago.
All right, let's go to the offensive line, Tony. Who are your risers there?
Jonah Mountheim of USC, formerly the left tackle, moved to center this year, is developing at the position, could be the first center drafted. He's smart. He's tough, relatively strong. The problem with Mannheim is I think his arm length is going to be under 32 inches, which is going to knock down his draft stock, but he's a real good blocker.
Donovan Tony, Jackson, I'll tell you what, if his arms are 31 inches, good thing he didn't stay a tackle because that would not have worked out there.
No, absolutely not. But it did last year for USC if you watch the film. He was a real good left tackle at USC, and they smartly moved him into center, and he's developing at the position. Donovan Jackson, who I talked about earlier, who's playing left tackle out of need for Ohio State right now. Donovan Jackson going into the 2023 season, a lot of people thought, hey, first round, maybe first round, late first round. Had a terrible season, went back, really played well at left guard for Ohio State the first 6 or 7 games before they kicked him out to left tackle. Really showed that playing ability and the potential that he had previously shown. I think it was right guard. I apologize. A zone blocking lineman gets out on the second level, can take out linebackers, can hit a moving target, shows the ability to kick out and pull around. Now he's going to have to play left tackle. Hopefully, for Ohio State's sake, he develops. Connor Colby of Iowa, a guy who's been there for a long time, a lot of starts, not great in any aspect, but he's solid in all areas of the offensive line position.
All right, and who are your sliders on the offensive line? And maybe they're sliders?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that anyone's really slid down, but I think you got to say that there is some disappointment in Will Campbell. There is maybe some disappointment the second half of the season in Kelvin Banks. I've talked about Will Campbell before. He's played well lately. Some people say guard. I don't think so. I think he's going to be a left tackle. Just doesn't show that nasty attitude. Kelvin Banks, who was so terrific early in the season, got exploited in that Georgia game. As I said on this podcast way back, he probably isn't going to measure 6'4". Some teams already have him on the guard board. I think that will just naturally suppress the draft stock and knock it down a notch.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on it. All right, Tony, I am off to Munich with the New York Football Giants. We're leaving Thursday night. We'll be back. Then the Giants are on their bye week, but we will make sure we get you an episode of draft season. Tony will go through the weekend of college football, which I'm going to warn you fans ahead of time. I am not going to see 2 seconds of it. So we're going to lean on Tony next week on what happened in college football. He'll do his defensive side of the ball, riders and sliders. And the following week, I'm trying to grab Dane Brugler. His new top 50 list will be coming out, and we can kind of do another kind of overview of the class episode like we did with Kyle Krabs last week. Tony, parting words or thoughts?
Well, since I'm going to be watching all the college football this weekend, I know I speak for most of the viewers when I say, when you come back from Munich, we want to break down and a scouting report on all the best beers in Munich. That's what we want to know about. So that's going to be your responsibility next show.
And pretzels as well, my friend. There will be many a pretzel being consumed in Germany. And my wife's coming out for a couple of days. We managed to con my brother and his wife into watching the kids over the weekend, Tony. So we actually have a kid-free, weekend. It's our 10th wedding anniversary this year, so it'll be a nice little weekend to have some fun out there.
Jawohl, as they say in Germany, right?
Yes, but we will also be, of course, Giants play. I'd love you a lot of work to do as well. Can't wait to get out there. Tony, good stuff. You can always check out Tony's stuff on sportskeeda.com. Thanks, Tone.
Thanks, John. Enjoy the trip.
That was draft season presented by Moody's. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at Moody's.com. For Tony Pauline, I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see you next week, everybody.